All right, welcome to episode 1 of the Rhode Island Gun Rights Podcast. I'm Mike, and today we have a very special guest for our very first episode, so it's quite exciting. A lot going on in the state regarding gun rights issues, and we have Glenn Valentine here to talk with us. We're going to go over the shenanigans coming out of the governor's office, and we'll discuss the strategic effort that's being discussed on social media and on the radio earlier today, and just generally what's going on in Rhode Island and what we're going to do to try to fight back against this stuff that's coming down. So I guess without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest, Glenn. Nice to have you on our first episode.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me.
No worries. If you want to just give the listeners a little bit of a background on who you are and what you're in,
Sure.
What you're involved in with the state and what your history is with the gun rights movement.
Yeah. So, I want to say in the maybe like mid 2000s, 2006-ish, maybe I got involved with, the Rhode Island Citizens Rights Action League, which was like the first organization to kind of press the gun permitting issue in Rhode Island. And I think that people remember, if you're old enough to remember, that back then for decades, they didn't issue gun permits at the municipal level. So that was an organization headed by a guy named Jim Archer. He has since moved on, and David Eichlein and I started the Rhode Island Firearms Owners League. And again, that was sort of just a repository for information about pistol permitting. And we started to get into litigation against departments to make sure that they issued permits like on a shall issue basis. And most of that, actually all of it really was done without litigation. I think the departments kind of figured out that we were on the right side of the law. And so most of them, 99% at that point, started to comply. And then around, when Newtown happened, gun control was a thing that would happen on a perennial basis, like the regulation, like proposed legislation. But for the better part of like 80 or 90 years, for the most part, not much passed. A little bash in the 50s, but obviously I wasn't even born yet. But when Newtown happened, that was the first big push to pass anti-gun legislation. We saw this cavalcade of bills come out that was just all the rehash, stuff that was dusted off and that we've been trying to pass nationally for decades. So that was 2013-ish. So, I got involved then. We were sort of up and running and had a lot of good data, about gun permitting and just guns in general in Rhode Island. So we kind of David and I got involved with, I guess, what would be considered the gun lobbying aspect. And so, we did well for a while. We formed a PAC. So I'm also the president of the Rhode Island Second Amendment PAC, which is the wing of, I guess, the gun groups that would donate directly to candidates or help run campaigns. And so the sort of been my two roles for the last, let's say, 15 years or so. Last couple of election cycles, been heavily involved with elections and kind of a little bit less involved with the lobbying aspect because we're the last maybe couple of election cycles we haven't done so hot, and we start to see that if we keep losing seats, we keep losing pro-gun Democrats and Republicans, then we're going to cease to have any sort of pull. We're not in a good spot now, obviously. So my focus is mostly on elections at this point, and so I guess that was kind of a little bit longer than you wanted.
That's great. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Citizens Rights Action League. So I mentioned in our intro podcast, kind of my pilot episode, that way back then, it was probably like, I don't know the date, but maybe 2010. I remember Jim Archer, you mentioned that name. I had trouble remembering those names. It was so far back, but then you had brought it up and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That was him. And then I moved on to like more campaign type politics, and
right.
I've since shifted back, so I'm trying to relearn the landscape and
figure
out who's who, because so much changed in those years. But yeah, no, that's great. So I think it's a good time to pivot to what's going on now, right? Like, so yesterday was a big thing at the at the State House with the governor, and of course it went back to really what motivated me for the project was the State of the State address and that nonsense, putting the bill into the budget and all that other stuff. But
right.
So I mean, if we want to go into like just a quick breakdown of what's going on and what's kind of motivating us at this point, right? Like, you want to?
Yeah. So I mean. So you were at both meetings we had in the northern part of the state, and I guess Tiverton and Manville. So it's the gun issue is we're the second safest state in the country. We do a pretty good job in the state at front loading the law with lots of ways to stop bad people from getting guns. So we don't have a gun problem in the state, and it certainly isn't addressed by this legislation. It's really just been something that the progressive Democrats have picked as their issue, in addition to a couple of others, to push the party further to the left, kind of push out these moderate Democrats. And that's been the trend for probably 2 decades, but since 2016-ish, they made some gains in that election, pushed out some sort of moderate establishment Democrats. So it really has nothing to do with anything related to public safety at all. We have no uh, history of issues with these types of firearms that they want to regulate, or any of the restrictions that they propose on a perennial basis. So it's entirely political. And Dan McKee, interestingly enough, came to us in 2018 and begged us at the Smithfield Sportsman's Club when he was being primaried by Aaron Regenberg. And so we supported him because at that point he hadn't had any sort of stance on gun control. He was a lieutenant governor, and it's not really a thing. I think they had extrapolated where Raimondo would be if Biden had won in 2020, and so or if a Democrat had won in 2020, and so we supported him. He won by 2,200 votes. So I mean, we certainly made a dent in that. Whereas we don't normally. We struggle in some parts of the state, but as a whole, when the statewide races, like we can certainly play a role. And I know I'm dipping a little bit maybe too much into the strategy, but
Yeah.
but so for McKee and why he's pushing this, he's being primaried again by Helena Folks, and we know from what we hear the speaker as well, Speaker Shikachi, and so he won by 3,300 votes roughly in the last primary. If the election, I think we all agree, had happened 3 or 4 weeks later, he would not have been the governor. Helena Folks would have beaten him. And so he feels compelled to press this issue because he's not been able to get this through. He supported some iteration of assault weapons ban ever since he'd been governor, as Raimondo did, and or even prior to Raimondo, I think Lincoln Chafee did as well. So the House and Senate, a lot of these people in the General Assembly, they've for the most part know that this really isn't something that we need, and so for whatever reason, Nick Mattiello, when he was speaker, didn't push it very hard, or didn't push it at all. The new speaker seems a little more open, obviously, to pass gun legislation because he has in the last couple of budget cycles. So this is a campaign issue for the upcoming gubernatorial primary, and so I think that's why there's so much pressure now to push this through, whereas it's sort of died in committee the last like 13 or 14 years where they pressed it really hard.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. It's one of those issues that they use to try to motivate their base, right? To get their base out and vote for them. And it's kind of like a rallying cry for them to get people to vote. It's
Right. And
yeah,
and to that point, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no,
to that point, in the journal today, yesterday, and also, in prior committee hearings, Jason Knight, who's the primary sponsor of the assault weapons ban, he commented about how after the 2022, ban on high capacity magazines, which was like the first really big piece of legislation to pass, he had commented about how no representatives had lost their seats because of the fact that they supported that stuff. But he fails to point out the fact that every single Democrat that sided with us was primaried, and not one of them lost. In addition to all the Republicans that sided with us. So I don't think really the gun issue is an issue with voters. I think wherever they are politically, if they're liberal folks that vote, for folks from the left, they're going to vote that way anyway. It's the gun issue isn't going to garner votes, I think, on their side. We have all the room to grow because we know, you and I think, are some of the younger folks that are kind of pushing out some of the older folks in terms of how the gun community is operated over the last several decades. We're obviously a lot more in tune. You so more than I am, but just in tune with what all the data says about the voting demographics, and so we see where we can do well in the last election cycle in 2024 and 22, but 24 especially. We targeted certain voters and we made gains, and we got a lot of low propensity voters to turn out in certain races that were traditionally been ignored. So I
yeah,
think I
yeah,
get
and
too far. I think I may have gone a little too far on that. Yes.
no. We can
Yeah.
circle back if we need to,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's certainly, some of these races are within tens of votes, if a lot of them hundreds of votes, and it's you know it. It doesn't take much to push that over. Just real quick before we move into the strategy more in depth, the assault weapons ban in general, right? Like it's pretty. Again, it's similar to years past. It does seem maybe a little more egregious, and we did know the one that Governor McKee posted on within the budget, or published within the budget, and then one just dropped couple hours ago from the usual suspects, Knight, Kazarian, like all those people. So they've already separated it out of the budget to kind of, strategize. I'm assuming because they know it's not going to survive in the budget, so they need to have one that's that's out there. But
Right.
but the ban itself, right? Like it's pretty far reaching, right?
Yeah.
It's yeah.
And that's, so there's sort of two challenges that one is that it is far worse than any ban in any other state. And so I think, that it's largely due to the fact that it focuses on a single feature. So in the past, like for instance, the 94 assault weapons ban, which everyone seems to think when you say assault weapons ban, that's what it is, and it's
Hmm.
not. But in 2000, in 1994 until 2004, we had a federal assault weapons ban, which was a semi-automatic rifle with a detachable magazine, and then any combination of two features would make it an assault weapon. So a collapsible stock, bayonet, lug, flash suppressor, whatever. So this one is a single feature, which basically just outlaws all semi-automatic firearms because there aren't many semi-automatic firearms that have rifles. I'm sorry, that have a detachable magazine and then don't have a pistol grip, or don't have a muzzle brake. So it or a threaded barrel or whatever. So if you look at any of the features, uh, if you look at just the definition of what they consider, it's a ban on all semi-automatic firearms, and there's a lot of ambiguity in it in terms of what, with the shotguns, what, it can exceed 6 rounds, but it doesn't specify what that round is. So we know there's smaller style shotgun shells, like if it could take the capacity of a 3-round shotgun and extend that to 9, if there's those short shells that they have. And so, there's a lot of ambiguity. A lot of guys are asking questions, and the reality is it really doesn't matter what's in the bill right now. We just don't want it to pass. We got to do everything we can to get it passed. And I think that the fact that a lot of folks tend to think that it is the 94 assault weapons ban all over again, that's something they could probably live with, but it's much worse. It's a ban on pretty much, with the exception of handguns, and there are some handguns that are in it. It's a ban on all semi-automatic firearms essentially. And I know the other side will say that's not the case, that we're exaggerating, but it absolutely is. If you look at anything in the gun shops today, that those are the firearms, that people own, in large numbers. I mean, we're talking, you know, if you look at ATF, the last time I looked over, last maybe 4 years ago, I went through the previous 12 years of background checks, and you're looking at north of 250,000 firearms, and the dealers will tell you that they're mostly in those categories of semi-automatic rifle and semi-automatic handguns. So they have large capacity magazines prior to them banning them, and also being like semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. So it's not a small number of guns. It's not like bump stocks when you probably thought, hey, there's maybe 100 or so statewide. You're talking, probably 300,000 of these things in the state.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, and if it does pass, right, even it doesn't take much for them to change the wording in the bill to make an amendment to it at a later date to add
Right.
even more restrictions, right? It's a change a couple of words, and all of a sudden, what's there now that's allowed is no longer allowed either, right? So they keep evolving it, and there is an aspect to it where they're allowing for a quote unquote registration, where of course
Sure.
you have to pay for the privilege to keep
Right.
the firearm that you purchased already, which is ludicrous at its own in its own right. But again, we all know, well, there's a couple of things, right? We've got gun registration is illegal in Rhode Island according to statute. Again, easy fix for them. They just changed
Right.
that. And again, we haven't had I should preface this by saying we haven't had I haven't had a chance to review the latest legislation that just
Right.
dropped. So there may be some things that are a little different in there. But then the other issue is now people who do register now they have a list, and if they do make changes, now they know exactly who has what, and it becomes another issue altogether. So it's just so it's bad on so many levels, right? It's
Right. Right. And there's a lot of similar to the magazine ban, and there's folks that will not comply with it,
Mhm.
and then there's folks that are just unaware of what the law is, and I think the non-compliance, oh, I'm sorry, the deliberate non-compliance is although they're pretty vocal, it's a very small, it's a minority of gun owners, and that the vast majority of gun owners, in the case of the magazine ban, still have no idea it's against the law. They think that it's grandfathered like it was in '94. They don't sit there on their computer and refresh the screen every 15 minutes to find out what the law, how the law has changed. I get they claim that ignorance is no excuse, but it's just that's the reality of what's happening. And so this will be a very similar situation where the overwhelming majority of people will not know you need to register it. They won't know it's illegal. Obviously, at the point of purchase, they'll know if they try and buy one. But it's really sandbagging folks because you purchase something, you might not be a gun rights junkie like we are and follow things regularly. And so you get caught going to the range like we see in Providence with this, everyone talks about the woman in Providence that got arrested, defending her home, 67-year-old retired woman, retired teacher or something, and she had a 12-round magazine, not a gun fanatic. So, these are the types of, she got arrested. These are the types of things that they're going to, that's the result of this, the sort of collateral effect for a bill that we don't need. The last person to perpetrate a mass shooting with an AR-15 in the state was a police officer in 1994-ish, Barberville, Foster area. Yeah, they're exempt in this, right? So, it's just purely a political thing. And, it's especially because of the fact that, as we're waiting for the Supreme Court to make a decision in the Snopes case. They keep pushing this off. They keep conferencing. We know how this ends. We know they will overturn both the magazine ban and the assault weapons ban, but there seems to be this massive push to push it, to get this thing through before the Supreme Court. So I get the court pushed it off until next session now. So it's fair game. But there was a push for this bill prior to the end of this session for the Supreme Court to conference on cases. So it was a mad dash to get it in before, which is crazy, which just shows you it's a political stunt. It's not about doing the right thing and putting people in really weird situations when, it's illegal, then the Supreme Court makes a decision. What then? It's all, I guess, the discretion of the Attorney General, whether or not he wants to continue to enforce it. So it's unfair,
Yeah.
across the board. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've talked about this at meetings and in some of the discussions in the past couple of weeks is that, we know what happens, right? They pass this law, even if it goes through the Supreme Court and they find in our favor,
Right.
you still got to fight it, right? Like you still have to have this whole thing that still got to fight. It's just this never ending battle to
Right.
just and they know that, right? It brings me to a good point. And this is, again, I think something that was brought up at one of the meetings in a discussion was that they don't care about our rights, right? We often will say it's our right, or you can't do that. It's unconstitutional. Well, we know this, right? They don't care. They just don't care, and they know it, and they know what the process is for you to fight to get them back, and they just put you through that hell of a process, right?
Right. And, and I'll say, I said, at both those meetings that I've said for probably 10 years that when you listen to them talk about successful gun control, it ends with the passage of a bill. Success is passing a bill. Success is not using analytics to say, okay, we changed a few years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, they changed the process to purchase a firearm. So, no one is talking about the analytics associated with how that may have made it easier or more difficult for criminals to get guns. When the bill came forward, I think 6 years ago, for the Attorney General to have to report gun crime in the state in terms of prosecutions, arrests, whatever. There was pushback by some of the most anti-gun folks in the General Assembly, and they conceded that they were opposed to knowing what the data was and having it presented because it would just serve as an obstacle to gun regulations. Well, what's the point of having? I mean, we talk about education, we talk about data driven. It comes off of their lips, not mine. When they talk about tobacco, they talk about vaping, talk about alcohol, like all of those things, they talk about the data, yet they deliberately, two individuals in the House deliberately voted against it or voted for it specifically because of the fact that it would just serve as an impediment to knowing the truth about, about how we need to regulate firearms. So, it is entirely political, and success is, like I said, just passing a bill.
Yeah. So
if this does pass, I mean, like you said, they'll find other ways to make gun control an issue. And similar to California, where if you familiar with the laws, there really are no more laws to pass. So they have to cook up situations and they have to cook up, hypotheticals so that they can regulate guns in very obscure ways, just for the sake of saying that, well, we have a gun control package.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah. Just one other point, but while I'm thinking of it, that I thought was interesting was the how they circle the wagons when this came out, right? Like, so they had their dog and pony show yesterday at the state
yeah,
house. A couple of things with that, right? There's something that a tactic that they use, and I think maybe we struggle with a little bit is they tell stories, right? They get emotion, they have an emotional impact, which with those of us on this side of the debate are more logically driven by data and numbers, and like it doesn't make sense because there's no data to prove why. But so they're telling stories to get people on board, and that's where they're finding the normies in the middle that don't necessarily follow this day to day and bring them in. So I thought that's interesting. And then the article that was written in the Projo in covering this story, we were they mentioned RI gun rights and
yeah,
Brenda and at the bottom of the article, and there's incorrect information, right? They're now whether it was intentional or not, the reporter forgot to put a zero. We don't know, but like we were talking before we started recording, they most people have read that information already. So even though they've corrected it,
right.
the cat's out of the bag. The toothpaste is out of the tube at this point, right? Yeah. So I guess we'll talk a little bit, and this kind of segues into the strategy, right? So we mentioned this, I think, initially is what they care about most, right? Some of these people aren't even anti. I don't want to say they're not anti-gun, but it's not like the reason they are on this issue is because they know their voters vote based on this issue. So if it was a different issue, they wouldn't do it, right? So
Right.
they're just trying to protect their seats, right? Like, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, yeah, for the
That's
most
my
part. Yeah, I mean, so I mean, there are some people that are passionate about gun control, and I mean, it is what it is with those folks. We have folks that are Democrats in the General Assembly that are on our side and that really get the issue, and there are some that were never fans of ours and are on our side now. But it doesn't make up the majority when you add up those folks with the Republicans. But they've been on our side and have not we're not wavered on that. And again, they get the issue. But there's folks in the middle that sort of don't care. They are concerned with getting reelected, and they think that their constituents care enough about gun control to vote. But I think that the last few election cycles have shown that it really doesn't matter when you have folks that actually represent anti-gun organizations primarying some of these Democrats, like in 2022. And those Democrats, the folks that voted with us, I mean, they won by larger margins than they ever have. So I think it's a fallacy for them to sort of say that their constituents are supporting this. Not to mention, I mean, and especially Representative Knight. I mean, he knows what the Supreme Court is going to do. And for him to say that, well, it's what his constituents want, well, if constituents all of a sudden, decided to push, the majority of folks in the state were opposed to safe funding of abortion, reproductive rights, and I think that they'd have a different opinion. Well, that's a civil entitlement, right? And so, I think that they have this, they ignore the fact that they're doing something that they know is not going to survive in the courts, and it kind of circles back to what we were talking about earlier. But the onus is on us to have to defend that. I think the mistake that we made was that, and other folks in the Second Amendment community maybe disagree with me on this, but trying to get those normies on our side was something we tried to do, but it just the reality is that we should be really just focusing on gun owners because we make up a significant population of the state. But again, I think some of the older, antiquated, ways that folks would communicate and try and mobilize people on election day, it just were things that don't work. So I think we've got some things that we last couple of election cycles. I mean, you worked on elections, so you understand a lot about the data, and so the things that are available to us that weren't 2 election cycles ago. So that kind of is a game changer for us, I think, in this next election if we can show that we if it's apparent to the folks that are pushing this that we can make a dent in their party come 2026, there is a good chance we could stop the bill.
Yeah. No, that's great. And so on this point, that's kind of what got me interested in I'd heard about the strategy and how you guys
Right.
were analyzing these races and how close they were, and then looking at the numbers of the people that are on our side, the 160,000 gun owners in the state. You've got all these members of clubs and all this, realizing that, what, if we start voting in primary elections, disaffiliate and vote in primary elections, then you can start really making an impact, because many of these elections only ever the real election really is in the primary for a large portion of these races, and and those races themselves are very tight, right? The general election, many of them run unopposed, so it's not even the election is the primary, and then the ones that do run have a challenger, they've all rallied around their best candidate, and then that becomes a challenge, right? So if you can vote in these, I'll let you take it away, but that's what I'm seeing, the opportunity.
Yeah, like so for us, this idea, I've said before, is we don't have to astroturf or anything. Like we have clubs, so we have roughly 25,000 gun club members in the state, spread out among what is it, the 30 or 40 clubs. But what's huge for us, so there's obviously more modern ways to communicate with those members, which we've already, and you're involved, so you know a lot more about data than anyone I've met. So like that, so I mean, I'm telling this for the purposes of people that are listening, but
Yep.
to activate those gun club members, we're obviously trying new things, which based on what we learned in the last few election cycles, and the fact that we had that 20-day early voting, and this some of the things we did in the last election to chase down low propensity voters, that we can activate a lot of those gun club members, and it's much easier actually in primaries because the numbers are so low. But in addition to that, we also have this piece where we've got these public ranges now, so like, or for-profit ranges. So some of these facilities, mid-state, Sakana River, they service, the last time I had asked one of the two businesses, and this was 3 years ago, what's your reach? And it's their reach is 50,000 people. So they've had, over the 10 years they've been open, 12 years they've been open, they processed background checks for people that have gone into their shop and, taken a background check, taken the safety class, so they can shoot on that range. Well, there's more modern ways now to reach out to those people in 2026 and in 2024 than there were, maybe 10 years ago. And so obviously, this is kind of in your wheelhouse, but like getting all that to sort of function, right? Where we can mobilize these folks in certain races. And especially, I mean, the easy part is the gubernatorial race. I mean, so you're going to
Yeah.
have primary for governor, you're going to have a primary for attorney general, you're going to have a primary for lieutenant governor. So lieutenant governor, I'm sure there isn't much interest in that. Although if Peter Naroa runs, I mean, there certainly is, folks view him as a guy who's very anti-gun, so they'd be very motivated to vote against him. In addition to Jason Knight, and so like that's two guys that will highly motivate folks to go and disaffiliate and get out to the polls on election day. But in the gubernatorial race, we've got these three folks that are running. So what do we do? I guess, so the two folks that are in office now, the speaker and the governor, if either one of those two decide to shepherd this across the finish line, which, I mean, it would really be both of them, then gun owners need to make that choice. They need to make the choice that they're going to go out and just, I think, as you coined it, disrupt, and just, show these folks running for office that if 20,000, 30,000 of us get off our butts and go vote in a primary that we wouldn't normally vote in, that's going to be a game changer. Again, if this had happened in the last election cycle, now we were busy with other races that we had focused on heavily, but had we, gone after the governor in the last election cycle, given the fact that it was so close, we would have absolutely played a role in that. Now, again, you got to make that hard choice to support someone that might not be pro-gun, but in that case, it's a sort of a test run to see what we can do to disrupt. Disrupted may not be, it's kind of, maybe is a harsh word, but that's the reality, is that if folks are going to run for office by stepping on our necks, and I guess we have no choice, we can't do nothing. And
Right.
so it certainly is something that's doable, again, based on the fact that we've in the last couple of election cycles, people have been, voting early, voting by mail. And so, especially in this last election, lots of things that we know we can put in place. We work with a consultant that worked in Pennsylvania, which is, we all know what happened there. So, we've got some good ideas. Obviously, a lot of the things that you put in place are going to be, probably the most important thing. But feeling confident that something will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And it serves as a couple of things, right? It serves a couple of purposes. One, it's a warning, right? Like we're organizing now 2 years out from an election. And, you know, regardless of what happens from now until then, maybe they'll think twice before they vote for this. That's a hope, right? Like whether it happens or
Right.
not, it's to be seen, but it's a hope. And if it does, well, now it's the chickens are coming home to roost, right? Like
Right.
it's okay. Now we're moving out and we're using what we have available to us to fight back. And
Right.
and it just happens to be it is what it is in Rhode Island, and this is an opportunity. Um, and I don't think I'm out of line by kind of laying that out there, but. Um, and you mentioned so the governor is certainly. Let me ask you this, and you hit on this a little bit, right? Because you might end up voting for somebody who is not, friendly towards us, but it's the incumbent that's the one that wants to keep their seat, right? Like so, this is
Right.
it's the incumbent that we're dealing with right now, and that we have to try to get on our side, I guess, or at least let them know we're serious,
Right, and again,
about
so I mean, if had we done this years ago, we'd be in a much better place. But
sure,
we obviously we don't have the things that we have, the systems that we have now in place that we didn't have back then. So this will be a test run. So it's I guess if you're running for governor, if you're and you decide that from now until June, the objective. Well, from now until June, you're sort of mulling over whether or not you're going to pass an assault weapons ban, and you've got this pretty large group of folks, probably one of the largest constituency groups in the state that you may think aren't all that, I guess, involved in Democratic primaries, but you sort of have no idea what's going to happen, right? Like you're running for office, you barely won the last time around. It's going to be a three-way race minimum, maybe a four-way race. Uh, do you risk, you know, upsetting a pretty big block of folks that you really don't know who they are and how they voted in the past? And so, I mean, you can poll all you want up until election day, and you'll have no idea. But what you will know is, and we've discussed this, that for us, similar to what we did in the texting campaign years ago, where you got 100,000 stickers made with information on how to disaffiliate and who we're targeting, with that campaign. And so when folks from now until June or whenever, this thing is slated to pass, well, really from now until the next election cycle, every single time they walk in a gun shop to panic buy or whatever they do, they're going to see a reminder on every single box of ammo, every single box of ear protection, whatever it is, they're going to see, that this is disaffiliate and get in the game, grab your glove, get in the game. And so it's going to be a reminder, to these folks, what happened with the magazine ban, what happened with the assault weapons ban. And this way they can, it was effective when we did it with texting. I think it'll be far more effective this time around because of the fact that people are really pumped up about what's going to happen.
yeah, I agree, and that I guess that brings us right into, like, the actual mechanics of the strategy, right? Like, how this actually works. So, you know, just from our discussions, it's quite simple, actually. So we have the landing page on the website, rigunrights.com/vote, and it'll take you to a page where there's a couple of buttons you can click. One is to check your current status to figure out. Some people don't even know, right, what their
Right.
affiliation is. So you just go to it takes you right to the Secretary of the State website, and you put in your name and your date of birth and your zip code, if I remember right, and it'll tell you. And then from there, you can actually if you need to change it, you can go in and change it, right? Am I
Right. Sure. Yeah.
yeah.
And like, I think it pointed out, like, you also want to make sure you go in and check your status because you don't know if you disaffiliated. I disaffiliated one year, and then when I went to go vote in the next primary, I was actually still affiliated or something to that effect. So it's not always accurate. So you want to go in and actually, follow through with going to the Secretary of State's page and double checking. You can disaffiliate, and then come election day on the primary, you still have the choice to vote Republican or Democrat. So you definitely if you vote in the Democratic primary, you can disaffiliate on your way out. So, it's for some folks in the state, there will be no option to vote in General Assembly races. There'll only be Democrats, and some folks don't like the fact. I mean, if they're a Republican, they don't want to vote Democrat. Like, it's really it's in your best interest because of the fact that sitting on your hands and just worrying about what's happening in the general election is it's not going to work out for you.
Yeah, so it's quite simple, and it's Another interesting aspect of this on our end is we can see the numbers of people switching from Republican to unaffiliated or even Democrat, like if they're which we say disaffiliate and just become unaffiliated, but we can see that shift, right? And we can track those numbers and track and gauge success of this of the effort. And they track those numbers, right? We know they track.
Right,
They keep an eye.
right,
I mean, they've been doing this for a while, and they're pretty good at it. So
right, right. Yeah, I mean, we
yeah,
had talked about like a snapshot of what it looks like now versus
yeah,
what it looks like in May, and so obviously, I mean, they'll notice traffic as well, and if I mean, I think we'll be successful at getting enough folks to disaffiliate. And again, we have obviously until June for them to decide to pass an assault weapons ban. But if they choose to pass it, obviously we'll still, or actually regardless of whether they pass it or not, it just depends on where we focus our efforts come election time. But we have 2 years. We have two
yeah,
years to get people to disaffiliate. And again, we're building with you and a few other folks, building a lot of the systems that we didn't have prior to the maybe this last election cycle, and obviously moving to the next one. I mean, that's where we really lack. On the other side, blows us out in terms of the amount of money that they get from outside organizations, and Moms Demand Action, Every Town for Gun Safety. So they have all of these systems in place to send automatic emails to the legislators. And we've always used kind of like it's like the Rube Goldberg of like, political movement. I mean, we are truly grassroots, but we get, pummeled for the fact that we've raised money and donated to candidates over the years, but it's all grassroots. There's no large donors. It's all donations. I look today, it's like the average donation is $26.03. So, we're working with very little. And if we didn't have guys like you helping out, and several other people, we would be sort of dead in the water. But we do have a lot of volunteers. So when it comes to ground game, with elections, there's a couple of things I think that will will be different in 2026. We'll have more volunteers to actually start hitting a lot of these low propensity voters. And that's one of the things I did in this last election cycle was in 2 House races. I went door to door for people that were on my list over the years that have shared their information. And, we were able to get those low propensity voters to vote. Now, I think that a strategy, obviously, with the rolling updates every day of who voted early, we can still, reach out to these people for 20 days. But I also think that, interesting enough, Republicans and more conservative people don't like to vote by mail, but the folks I've had conversations with that are or have already disaffiliated, interesting enough, would be interested in voting by mail because they don't normally vote in a primary. So I guess they're a little bit less concerned about their vote. It was sort of an interesting dynamic. So I think
yeah,
that's something to capitalize on by making those making giving it putting out information on how folks can do that more easily in tandem
yeah.
with early. So you know.
No, that's a good point. Uh, yeah, I guess I don't think we should ignore that there's more groups that are involved, right, in this effort, right? It's not just the Second Amendment PAC or or Rhode Island Gun Rights. No, Rhode Island Gun Rights is just providing a hub, an
Right.
information distribution hub for this. But I mean, if you want to mention some other people that have kind of
Yeah, so I
supporting it,
mean, the groups that are like, so the Rhode Island Second Amendment Coalition is the sort of lobbying end of things. They're the NRA state association, so they deal with mostly testifying to the state house and sort of
yeah,
lobbying legislators. Over the last, like, let's say 15 years or so. There's Rhode Island Rifle and Revolver, which is Brenda Jacobs' organization. So they again, they're involved with the advocacy end of things, and then they're also involved a lot with the youth leagues, things like that, the
mhm,
sporting aspect, the part that we actually don't get to enjoy because we're too
right,
busy, with stuff like this. And then there's obviously the Rhode Island Firearms Owners League, which is, the president, David Eichland, who was, if you've got a gun permit in Rhode Island, I mean, he's a pretty modest guy. I think I said this at the meeting the other night. He's a very modest guy, but if you have a gun permit, it's probably because of what he's done. So sadly, he moved to Florida. He has had it. So he decided to move to Florida because he can't take, all the things here. And interesting enough, he moved like really close to the house we have in Florida. So it's kind of funny, but so he's gone. So the rifle has been sort of like, you know, in need of folks to help volunteer. We have also a defense fund, the Rhode Island Firearms Owners League Civil Defense Fund, which was to raise money prior to COVID. We were going to start litigating some things we saw with pistol permitting. So we have money for that. We just haven't really had many people volunteer to come forward and litigate some of these things. But that's still an ongoing thing. And the Federated Sportsman, which is the should be the conduit for all the clubs statewide. I mean, it maybe doesn't function as efficiently. Well, it doesn't function as efficiently as it should. I think that's probably more to do with the fact that you've got a little more resistance at the club level versus at their within their organization. But as you saw at the meeting the other day, some of these clubs, like when things like this happen, then they start to get nervous, and then they become much more open about how they're going to disseminate information or what they're willing to take from us and disseminate to their club. So and it's unfortunate that it takes this this level of I guess anxiety to make people start moving. So
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just bring up Parabellum as well.
oh,
Parabellum
sorry.
Provisions. Dan and his group, they do a lot of training and stuff, is from my understanding. So they're involved as well. But yeah, so there are groups out there. Again, we're in the early stages, so a lot of this is connecting and building the network up again, and just getting this going. But it's happening, right? Like
Right.
the old Ron Paul, waving his hands. It's happening.
Right.
Me,
Right.
but
And well, I mean, it's at least, I mean, that's a blow smoke, but like, at least we have guys like you that can look at the metrics, so that we know which direction, if we're doing certain things, like, obviously there are a couple more, you saw the new platform to raise money for the PAC. So like,
yep.
Simple things like that have increased significantly, raised a significant amount of money in an hour and a half right after I posted that new link. So I think, having you being able to sort of look at what's effective from, the data side of things. And, we can sort of know whether the calories we're burning
Right.
are being effective at reaching people. So, we definitely know, I mean, as you confirmed that, with the last couple of weeks now, things have been picking up, in a very positive way for us.
Yeah, the past
So,
2 days, the analytics on the just on the website alone have just shot through the roof. And we're tracking the buttons that people click when they go to the Secretary. We don't know who it is necessarily, but we know that people are clicking the links and going to the Secretary of State website, and that's reassuring. There's several hundred that have done that so far. So that's a good thing. I do want to we start winding down here. Just reiterate the donation thing. You said you just set up a new donation system, and it's hard to rattle off the link, so I will post that link in the show notes so people can go there. It's also on the logo on the rigunrights.com/vote page goes to the donation, and the reason that's important is, like you mentioned, buying a couple 100,000 stickers or whatever that costs money, right? Like that's not for free.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
mean, I get, like, some folks don't like to share their information. I guess,
yeah.
the things, the compliance related things we need to do, make them a little squirrely. But if they donate less than $200 or less, the information just gets retained with us and not with, it's not reported to the Board of Elections. So if they donate to the litigation fund, that's entirely, just there's no reporting requirements for that. But obviously the things we're using for political things have to follow, and our folks are squirrely about sharing information. So it makes it much more difficult for us to be able to, get people to donate. But I
Yeah.
mean, it's happening. So, that's a huge plus. And honestly, like, I mean, we're seeing, like you said, you saw a spike in the people that are actually going to the Secretary of State's website and disaffiliating. So I haven't, I have a fairly big list of people that over the years that have testified, just south of about 20,000 people. So I'm hoping that, I haven't sent that out yet, just making sure that everything on your end was solid this week. And so I think you and I can decide, when we roll that out. And, the texting service that we have, I mean, there's a couple of things I need to address with that. And I'm not certain I can text out an actual website because they sort of flag it. So, but I think
Oh, yeah.
once we dump the information out to those people, you'll see it. We'll see a huge spike in the number. And then, once we hit the shops, with the literature we're going to drop off and, some of the promotional stuff, I think that it's going to be unbelievable because we
Yeah.
did that with just texting and that was explosive in terms of how it worked out. And this is much more important than getting on a texting, service. So,
Yeah. I agree. So I guess what's the next steps, right? Like, what do we want to leave everybody with, and what they can do to kind of help the effort? Obviously, disaffiliate, right? Disaffiliate now. The sooner the better, because then we can start using those numbers to say where we're moving this needle. But also we need boots on the ground, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
like, what do you?
Yeah. So, like we pitched it at the last two meetings. So, most clubs, there's certain parameters in terms of what they can do politically. So they can do educational. So, just educating us, as to why someone will want to disaffiliate is perfectly okay. And we're not endorsing any candidates, right, through the clubs. But, they understand that, who are the players in terms of pushing this agenda, and they, folks know this. So, we need folks at the clubs to volunteer to continue some of the things that we've done at the last couple of meetings, having these public meetings on what's happening and what they need to do, because that's not sustainable with, having guys like you and I go out there, you know, 3 times a week. It's just not, it wouldn't happen fast enough. So, we do have some volunteers that are already hitting some of those places. And then, in about a week and a half, when we go all in on the promotional stuff, we'll need folks to step forward to volunteer. So, however they can register on your site, right? Can they, yeah. What information can they answer?
Yeah, so you sign up for our newsletter. Yeah,
Okay.
our newsletter, email, your name, your an email address, and we're going to start shooting out.
Right.
I explained this in our first episode, but
Okay.
it's, again, we're an evolving thing too.
Right.
The site's like, I think 3 weeks old.
Right. Right.
It's like
Right.
it's. I mean, we've come a long way in a couple weeks,
Oh
but
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
email's working now. Actually, I tomorrow I think I have a newsletter going out with current information. So,
Right.
yep. So that's first step, and then like we talked about SMS, and we're looking at a couple of other
Yeah.
ways to push information to people. So that's the
Yeah.
hardest thing, is right, communicating. Social media, we
Right.
know they put a foot on us to try to get information out. It's
Right.
really hard.
Right.
But that being said, if you do see anything on social media, share it, right? Like, share it and share it as much as you can. Like it. What's
Right.
the YouTube thing? Share, like, share, and subscribe kind of thing. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And I think if people, like I think for a while there, I think our pages were dead. I think that things are picking up now, and so it's not being throttled back as much as it was the last
yeah.
couple of years. So it seems to be a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, for in general, people just need to reach out, like, again, sign up for a newsletter. And then when we put a call out for people to volunteer, we'll have specific things as opposed to just saying volunteer. It's kind of a tough thing when you just say volunteer. So, we'll have definite, a day where we go out to all the shops. So we meet in a central location, and we disseminate stuff out to all the shops. And then if there are any shop owners, that I sort of haven't reached out to yet, if they want to reach out to us, they can do that as well. So.
Yeah, you just brought up a good point, and maybe something I should do with the gun rights site is get a volunteer page up, so people do want to volunteer. They can go in, they fill out the form, so to speak, let us know
Right.
what their talents and skills are, right? And then
Right.
we can have a list of, if, hey, we need to do graphics. Okay, we've got 5 people on the list that are graphics designers, and we can ping them for help. So
Right.
I will do that. I'm going to put that. You just
Right.
put another task on my plate, but
I know. I'm
you
good at
didn't do
that,
it, but
right?
your idea
Yeah.
did. Yeah, you triggered the idea. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's great. Like you said, you get, just keep following and keep sharing the information, get it out there, go disaffiliate, and we'll go from there. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to close off with?
No, I mean, I just appreciate you doing all the things that you do. I mean, I know you're not going to sit there and toot your own horn, but like, I think that, like, you definitely fill a void that you and a few others have stepped forward, and just, it's definitely going to make a difference this time around. And I think, just, having sort of a modern, like a centralized hub is just, I think it's what we didn't have. So I appreciate that, but
it's where it's where I could contribute. I've talked to you
yeah,
about this before. There's certain, again, where we need the skill, where certain skill sets where they
right,
best used,
right.
right? Like, so that's kind of where I felt I could make an impact. So yeah, I'm
I
more than happy to do it. And for all you've done for so many years, I got to thank you as well, because that's, I mean, it's a thankless job, and it's hard, and lots of respect. So
No,
that's yeah. Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah.
All right. I think this is a good episode. For our first
Yeah.
episode, we'll wrap it up. And as Glenn had said, go ahead and go to rigunrights.com/vote, and it'll get all your disaffiliation information there. Subscribe to the newsletter. That's how we can communicate. We control the newsletter. Nobody else controls that. So that's something we control and we use to our advantage. So That's important. And until next time, stay safe and disaffiliate.